Hi everyone and welcome to the Tormek headquarters in Lindesberg for today's live class when we will be doing advanced knife sharpening. I think it will be an episode, it might be long, but hopefully you will learn a lot. Please remember to like and subscribe us on YouTube. Also, this is live, so whatever may happen, but there are also advantages when it's live that you can ask questions and we'll try to answer them as best as possible during the show. We should also present ourselves for those who haven't seen us before. My name is Sebastian and I'm a country sales manager here at Tormek. And with me I have the sharpening doctor, Wolfgang Hess. You may present yourself.
Hello. As Sebastian said, my name is Wolfgang Hess and I'm country sales manager for Central and South Europe.
Great. And behind the camera, Victor. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you.
Great. So in today's advanced knife sharpening class, we will be discussing different aspects of knife sharpening that are often debated and discussed. It might be a bit too detailed for some of you viewers, and for others perhaps it's completely spot on. However, we hope that everyone will get some insights into knife sharpening and that it will help people get a sharper, more satisfying result when you sharpen your knives. We will be discussing all kinds of different aspects, but we will be discussing different angles, different knife shapes, different knife types, materials, honing, and so forth. We will try not to get too scientific, but a bit scientific. And with that said, I think I will let Wolfgang start on the whiteboard perhaps.
Yes.
And show a couple of different knife shapes, name of the different parts of the knives and different grinds. Perhaps we start with the knife itself.
Exactly. Just that we talk about the same thing. I suppose you know every detail, how they're named. Just when we talk about the edge, then we mean really the part that we sharpen. Or the bevel and grind, and the edge is really only the absolute tip, the apex in the end, and the bevel is itself the face that we sharpening on. Then we have another bigger one, they often call it even Scandi grind. The rounded part is the belly here, and the tip, and the absolute, it's the point of the tip. Spine or back. This is the back side of the blade. Coil is just a protection version for the sharpening, easier. Ricasso, which we look a little bit later on, it's important, especially for handmade knives, even also for industrial knives. It has some indication for our sharpening or for the angle. Then you call it here the guard, mostly only downwards, one side or both is the guard or the bolster it's called, and then you have the handle and the handle with all the other parts which are not of interest for us right now because we sharpen only here.
And of course not all knives looks like this, but this was a knife that had most of the different terms in knives.
Exactly.
So we choose that one.
And then we have just here a picture of different blade shapes. That means the thick black line, this is the bevel, and the edge on the bottom, of course, which is mostly the tradition like a meat cleaver, or in the Asian knives, the cleaver which is rounded, sometimes a little bit more straight. Modified, it is in principle a little bit edgy and straight down. Sheep foot, also typical what you see in Asian knives. And one clef is typical like a classic also pocket knife, folding knives, which are totally straight. You see them often also in France. And we go with the clip. It is a little bit like a curved top of the spine to the belly, to the tip. Persian, of course, typical like a sword shaped, nicely symmetrical, nice curve, always a little bit bent, mostly until to the handle. The straight back, what you have most kitchen standard knives, straight in the back, and then you have just the tip, sometimes a little bit more rounded, less rounded, Then the famous tando, the Japanese type of with two bevels with a tip here, and sometimes without or with a little nick or the drop point like this here, which is nicely symmetrical, and then just lower down to the tip. Leaf shaped is more or less really symmetrical, typical also like both for kitchen knives, because you want a nice tip here. Spear point, this is, you see, also symmetrical like the leaf shape, but just more compressed, more rounded. The dagger, which is also symmetrical here, but sharpened on both sides. Then the Bowie knife, the classical, mostly have a slightly face there, and the bevel even can be sharpened. The hawksbill, really round, classical pruning knife. You see them in France very often, in the vineyards, or gardeners use these knives, typical. Recurve, it's mostly in the outdoor for hunting knives, which are concave shaped, which is a little bit difficult to shape, but we will talk about this, how to give this a nice shape. And the famous kukri, it's a Nepalese knife, which is quite effectful. Also, you have both sides, which could be difficult, depends on the radius here, but the big ones, the normal size,
this
is
is
not
of
a bigger
course
problem.
not all shapes there are, but the most common, I would say. And also we will later on in the episode show how to think when you sharpen a couple of different of them, how to clamp the knife and so forth.
Exactly.
But that will be later on.
What us affect mostly is the curve, how strong it is curved, or less or more like straight, or then the recurve, like same here too, in the convex shape, which gives us more.
We like to give you an overview of the different shapes, so you get an idea of
exactly
of,
that you recognize your knife. Maybe I have that, that and that shape.
Exactly.
But in the end, there's only mostly a clamping
Yeah.
issue. Otherwise, sharpening is exactly the same. And then just in the cutting through the blade like that, we have different shapes, which also affect us in the thickness or in the shape, like here in the hollow grind, which is rounded, but it is only slightly, so it's very difficult on the Tormek to sharpen all the way. But in the end, you sharpen anyway, just a little tip down there, give them a bevel and a nice edge then there. When you, after a while you use it, come up and up, then you have to reshape it, and then you have to go really on a bend sander to give a nice shape again. Flat grind is exactly the same, just the sides are totally straight, and even then the small bevel down there. Then some old knives you have sharpened all the way through. There's no separate edge on it or no other bevel. So these are traditionally sanded on a belt sander, but also very delicate, of course, the tip, because it's very thin. The chisel grind you see often in Japanese knives, just on one side sharpened, typical like a sashimi knife or so. And then the convex grind, which is, you see a little bit bend side here, typical is the Swedish A1's knives, Feldknife, which mostly have this shape and they go down. So, but mostly you have anyway a small, slightly second bevel on it, because it's easier and faster to maintain. Otherwise, you have to grind all the way, and we show on the knife you won't destroy the complete coating, for example. Scandic grind. This is like the Mora knives, which are very known. We had a huge, they are parallel, flat, even blade, and then just a big one, bevel, and then straight down completely, or sometimes just faster make a secondary bevel just to get a sharp knife very quick and fast. So these are the main things, and mostly it's a combination of everything.
Yeah, exactly. So these are not all the grinds there are out there, but the main ones.
Yeah, and as you said, we won't go in too deep, too scientific. This would be another episode. We want to just show how it affects and advance the first class a little bit in the shapes.
Yeah, our first episode was knife sharpening, very basic. Now we take the next step.
And it's 90% enough for the most people, and we talk now about for 10% or 5% for the little bit extra.
I thought we would
jump
into the deep end right away, and I will ask you the $1 million question. What is the perfectly sharpened knife?
The perfectly sharpened knife, I would say, first of all, for what it is used, that depends what angle I use. If it's heavy duty, we have a big angle for a kitchen knife, maybe you would choose a slightly smaller angle. So this is one thing. Then, of course, the perfect edge and at the bevel, and then edge without the burr, which cuts perfectly. But as I said, in correlation to the purpose of the knife, the presentation or the durability of the edge, which is important, because you can make a super perfect, nice, even angle on the knife. It's super sharp, but then when you cut on the wrong cutting board or whatever, then you will destroy immediately with the first cut the perfect knife, and then it's no longer perfect. So always to the purpose in relation, the perfect sharpen, and how to achieve it. This is what we like to talk about today a little bit.
And it's complex also because, as you say, the angle, it depends on the use, what you want to do with it, but also the steel, the material, how it's produced, and the shape of the knife as well.
Yeah, I would say.
Should we go? A question we often get when we're out there, and that is often discussed and debated, is: are you supposed to be edge trailing, or are you supposed to
edge leading?
Yes. First of all, perhaps, what does that mean, and when do you use the different? What do you recommend? How do we see the question
and answer the question?
Yes.
As with all questions, I think today, if you would ask 10 people, you will get 10 different answers, and everyone said this is the truth.
Yes.
This is what we discover. There's a scientific, the facts, but they apply not sometimes perfectly for the purpose again. No. So you have to go a little bit like that. So there's no absolute truth, because for the practical side. And this is what we try to highlight a little bit today. There's no right, no wrong, but there's an optimum or ideal way to do it. Because if we want, as you said, the absolute perfect knife, I think you have to invest to the purchase price of a Tormek 2 digits, 2 zeros more, and have a computer-guided robot. But this is a system you can come very, very, very close.
Yeah, the next step would be a CNC milling machine with laser or a robot that sharpens.
Yeah, back to your question again, edge trailing or edge leading. Edge leading means from the horizontal position, rotating of the stone instead, against the stone is edge leading. And trailing is when you use it from the horizontal position and the stone is going away from you. It's like the freehand sharpening from your grandfather on the big sandstone. This is the edge trailing, and we go against. So why and which should you choose? In general, of course, the edge leading is the first choice, because you take the material from the edge to the end of the bevel, and on the end of the bevel you don't get any burr, and that burr from the beginning here is getting, it's like when you're drilling also, like the impact burr, it's more compressed, and it's smaller. And the other one, it's because you don't get anyone here, it's therefore small. On that way, you take the material from behind, you have so much more material, and build up a burr. And this burr is much, much bigger, because you hold always all the material from the length of the bevel. A knife is very small. If you have a chisel, it's a little bit different. They have quite more material, so that it's getting bigger because it's taking that way up. And then you can choose your different wheels, and they affect the building of the burr too. When we talk about our stones, you have the SG, our super grind standard stone, with a 250 diameter on the T8, on the T4 it's a 200, and with a grit of 220. So the super grind is an aluminum oxide, which fits also the most tasks in the sharpening. We come a little bit more than later on it. Then we have a black stone, the SB 250 black stone, and of course then for more honing, polishing when you come to that, the Japanese waterstone, the ES or the JS 250 or 200 for the T4. Then we have the super abrasives. This is normally CBN and diamond. We choose the diamonds because we have a low speed. And this is the choice for that purpose here. And these are more aggressive. So if you think a diamond crystal, it cuts pieces out and scrape it out. The burr, it tends to get smaller, but a little bit thicker. In a stone, you get a little bit of slurry on the crystals, and they break down, they get a little bit smaller. So they cut also, but there's more plastic. They draw a little bit more the material, and the finer one, and it's getting thinner and longer. These are the different types of burr you would get when you would look on a microscope. So therefore, if you go on a stone, again, back, it's very short. On the stone, here we get a thinner, finer burr. Here it's also thin, but it's longer. On the diamond wheel again, it is thicker, it is shorter. Here it's also shorter, but also thick and more aggressive because it cuts more. So these are the two things you have to think about. But in general, for the stones, we use therefore always that version. In diamonds, it is no problem to use them either in the edge trailing version, but when you come to the finer grits, like here, when you go on 1000, it's still okay. You can optional, of course, use that version. The Japanese waterstone, if you are afraid to cut in the stone, we talked many times in different sessions or issues here of our sharpening classes, you can use in the horizontal, so edge trailing in the sharpening. Then you get very thin, and it's very easy to hoon away in the horizontal position, but works also in both ways.
So to recap, edge leading would be our preferred method for most types of knife, especially on stones.
Yep.
Because you get shorter burr, which means it's faster, which means that it's easier to hone away as well. In certain times you would go edge trailing because you get an even finer result. For the Japanese waterstone, for example, you don't have the risk to cut into the stone.
Exactly.
And then there are certain shape of knives as well, where you almost need to go edge trailing.
Because we use more the edge of the stone, which then is too aggressive, you would cut in there. So it's better use from the edge trailing as from the horizontal position. And even there, the finer it is, you can say a little bit, use the horizontal position, the edge trailing, and for the other purposes, just sharpening or grinding when you like to get a form. You can use edge leading, because it's also more aggressive, because you get more pressure to the stone, because the movement is together here when you come. So you get a nicer touch. Here it's more or less lifting off a little bit, so the pressure is not exactly the same, which is perfect for the finishing few strokes, because you have less pressure, you get also a little bit finer edge. So this is, again, we talk about the last percentages. For the most purposes,
I'm
said,
quite sure that either you go trailing or leading, you will get a good sharp result.
Absolutely.
But now we're into the fine details.
Fine details, exactly.
If you would be freehand sharpening, then you would be trailing.
Yep.
And that's also perhaps traditionally, a lot of people say that when you go edge leading, that's the wrong way, but that's because the history and the tradition, people have been freehand sharpening, and then trailing is the obvious choice.
Yeah. And we have the cheek, so we have a fixation here.
Yeah.
So this is now not a big issue. Here, freehand, of course, a question of the angle.
Yeah.
You also have with a cheek, of course, the security to maintain the edge, but at the end, there's there's no risk. You have here a higher risk against the direction, of course.
Perfect.
So these are the main things. To the burr and hooning, I think we come to the next step.
We have a reflection here, but you can get catches with edge leading, he says. And that's what we discussed a bit, especially on the Japanese waterstone, the risk of getting catches. On the original stones, not such a big risk, but the catches is often because you put too much pressure or you have a too steep angle.
Yeah. What happens is totally when you're focused, just as to demonstrate here, no angle adjustment, nothing. When you have in that position here, and you're focused, and you're maybe a beginner, therefore we recommend also a beginner not to start with the diamond wheel, because a mistake in the diamond wheel is a mistake. You can't correct here the stone, you can drew, of course, to get a feeling. So to have always the pressure forward, when you get a catch, it's mostly when you concentrate on not have the right position, that you feel secure, you have the pressure forward. When you have the pressure forward, this way, you get automatically the pressure to the stone, and then and even flat. That moment, then you come on the edge, even with that stone, and have too much pressure, you will get a catch and get up. It hooks, nothing happens with normal stone. In a Japanese stone, because it's quite soft, you will get the catch, and so which therefore we also recommend to round off the edges.
Exactly, to round off the edges, you will avoid catches more, especially on the Japanese waterstone. Not too much pressure and not too steep angle. If you have a too steep angle, then it's better to go edge trailing instead, perhaps.
Exactly, especially in case if you are unsure.
Yeah.
But in my career now, in the last 8 years, I got 2 catches in a Japanese stone. And this is mostly on shows when you are talking or not looking or not concentrating. No. So even there, the risk is minimal when you have the rounded, because on the edge, of course, quite aggressive or like that, which is in general you should avoid, because you get immediately a small jack in the blade, which you have to grind.
2 good tips: not too much pressure, round off the edges, and hopefully you will be good.
Exactly.
Great. Should we talk a bit about how to set the angle and angles in general on a knife? How do you set the angle, or how?
Exactly. We have
what affects the angle?
The Tormek way where you use to set the angle the marker method, which we blacken the edge, which we showed also in our first episode. I don't like to explain all the way, otherwise we have a copy of it.
If you want the basics, we recommend you to go
back
our
to
first episode.
Or with the Angle Master, the WM 200, to get the angle. And what angle, again, there are recommendations from the manufacturers. The purpose, of course, roughly a recommendation, again, just for filleting knife around 20 degrees, all-purpose knife around 25 to 30 degrees, depends of the extreme of the duty, 30 plus 35 to meat up to maybe 38 or so, but then gets more or less to a cleaver, to an axe, so the cutting performance is less. And also, of course, the bigger the angle, the more durable is the angle, but also always to see in relation to the material of the steel, if it's carbon steel or whatever type of steel, Sandvik steel. It's most, I think, in the professional kitchen knife, it is more or less 80%, I would say. They use this knife, very popular also in France and in Germany. And yeah, then all they have the different mixtures with chrome and mangan and nickel and whatever to get your performance. They have their recommendations. This is what we recommend. We have on our webpage a list you can download on the English page of our webpage. It's in the knowledge live sharpening. There is a downloadable PDF file. It's a living file. We had always different recommendations on it. Or you have your knife, you want your purpose, your angle. But that said, if we say whatever angle, 25 or 30 degrees here on the blade, it is how we clamp. And there are different ways. You have to adjust through the height, then you get an angle. Or when we lengthen it, we come longer down or higher up. Then you have software apps on the market, or laser. What you have, laser, I would maybe demonstrate a little bit where the risk is, where you have to have an eye on it. And this is where we come to the way how to clamp a knife. And I think it shows really, really good. We take a new line, which is, so I simulate here because we don't rotate the blade. So this is and this is good also, you can do it at home, just to try and feel and get the feeling what happens to your angle. So what we want to do is, you have your knife, a nice and even bevel all the way, because it looks nice, and it seems to be the same angle all the way. Now, the big but. Depends on the thickness of a blade. Even if you look on a blade, it's thicker here, it's thinner here. It changes. You have the rounding. When it's thicker or even longer and shorter, it would affect, of course, the angle, because that means this distance here, and then we go, maybe I would exchange this knife to this. It's always like in cooking shows I have prepared. So, I took just the radius here. The black line is the radius from the center. But as you know, also our jig is flat and has here on the side a radius. That means when you turn around here, you have the contact here no longer in the middle when you rotate. Then it's the rotation here and the rotation here. But straight on, the black line is the radius. So that means that radius here is from that side. When you turn on that side, it is that blue line over. I've put it a little bit longer that you see it, but as long as you go parallel, you have your desired or pre-adjusted angle of 25, for example. You have it on the line. Put the line a little bit that you see it. So the line would be normally exactly under the bevel, just to see. When you go here, then the angle is correct. But now you see you're going up. Okay, then we say don't go round. You see, you will move this different on the stone, getting closer to the bottom. Then your bevel gets wider. And this is when you see on your knife that when the bevel, I would say, parallel here and then getting wider and then maybe up to here. That happens when you come closer to down the stone. So this is what we want to avoid.
Yeah, that's aesthetically not...
and also the angle is different.
Yeah, but to get a perfectly looking angle, that won't be the same angle the whole way. So it's
change.
Yeah, it's impossible to have the same angle all along the bevel and get a good looking angle at the same time.
Exactly. Even if it's the same angle here, if material is thinner, here thicker, that means here would be the bevel wider, then on the thinner material it would be smaller also. Yes. This is not looking nice. What we do here is normally we lift up here. This is maybe now a little bit in the way to show. When we you hold it perfect. When we lift up here, then because it's not the same adjustment here, down the line. So when we lift up, then we can maintain it. But if you go too far, you will round that tip off, nearly straighten in a certain way and then getting steep rounded. This is also what we want to avoid. We want to nicely shape. And this is where the point you can have any jig you want, but you need really to control and train these movements. That can be even that you see when I go up, I go out of the direction, out of the machine. Just repeat over, lifting, and then even turn it that way, a little bit up. This is what you have to train and see after a while. Even I go a little bit for Victor, turn around a little bit to see it. If you see this distance here, the white, the blade, how wide it is, and a little bit in here, this is the line what I've painted here. And you lift it up exactly in that axis, up, and it is in the circle, then you hit more or less the same angle. But more or less, this is what I say, depends on a few millimeters and you're on a different angle. But in the end, it doesn't matter. It should look nice and cut.
And that's why, for example, these computer programs and other people sometimes say they are more exact than our VM200 or the marker method. Yes. But you will never get it. You will never get the exact same angle all along the bevel, but it doesn't really matter. There is no absolute science to get the same.
There are too many ways in the rotation in three-dimensional
exactly.
movements.
You would need a robot or a CNC milling
and you have
machine.
one fixing point. So that should be then also movable, but this is because holding in that direction. And what I want to show to clamp, even in the handbook, we don't clamp too deep. You don't need. It's about 3 millimeters, also enough. And this knife is a little bit smaller. I have another one which is a little bit longer and the shape is a little more distinct. I go now parallel to the back, what you often see, and light along the line. And then you see already, even in that, and some knives are much more forward. You have here another angle than here. And this is the risk sometimes that you get a blade which ends up with a hollow grind after a while. It's like the same effect when you come over the edges and grind it round. So therefore, and then you come much, much, much longer up here. You can say, okay, we align from that tip to that line, go align a little bit more to that line. That helps me. And then I don't put it flat on the universal support, because then we have the other way around, the negative way in compared to the other. We align it when we measure the angle parallel. And then you see we have the point where the radius comes in. When we go forward, we lift, and we are much, much closer here. When we lift, or even if it's bigger, we can go a little bit up to compensate, but then we have the mostly already compensated. This is when I take this forward again. You see the radius here. We try, and you see also I have not in the middle. I've moved a little bit to the tip, but roughly again to that line. And when you turn around, you see the radius is as close to the knife's radius, so that it's much easier to compensate because you are already in the half of the curve. Then it is much easier when you sharpen. You see, you come not as far, and you are here in the shape. You are not too far away, because then the angle is also changing. Very close.
You will still not get the exact same angle, but you will come closer
Very close
to get the same angle.
Exactly. As soon as you're a few millimeters out, but it's very, very minimal. So, but this helps you if you just keep in mind that shape. And now I have chosen for that knife, also I moved it completely inside. So this is the radius we have shown here. It's about 12 millimeters. That means it looks also a little bit up outside the radius, just to show you the effect. But this is the minimum to the end of the cheek, and then additionally 12 millimeters, because it's the minimum you have as a protrusion to avoid touching with the cheek on the stone on a 25 degrees angle. So 12 millimeter, absolute minimum, otherwise you will touch the stone. So that means this is the smallest diameter, radius you can get. I've done this with another knife. You can see the shape here. It's smaller, it's longer, and like these leaf shaped. We have it here. We talked about it. You see the leaf shape. It's the classical shape. And the Mora knife, which is a little bit more curved. This is you see a little bit, and then it goes a little bit more. This is the classical chop point. Here I've increased the radius about 165 millimeters. That means I've gone all the way out and clamp it, so even a little bit too short. I've clamped it more or less parallel. When I land here, it's underneath, you can't see it. But what I want to just show here, you all the way, you can follow, and I take this off here, because even here, in the middle, it's big. The radius ends here, so the last tip is coming out of the radius, which is not as difficult as when you would clamp it here. Then the knife would stick out much, much longer. Then you have more difficulties to complete the roundness. We'll take it out from the cheek, just to show the effect. When we go in clamping, we add in the middle and parallel to the. So when you go here, you see, then you don't come too far from it. Then you need to lift. What you can do I said, coming a little bit closer. Even if that side is coming out of the radius, it doesn't matter because this is straight as long as it's along that line parallel to the back side. Then again, it's much easier. Now this knife isn't sharpened, you see, they completely destroyed the edge. It's not sharpened on a Tormek, it's on a bent sander. Sharpened, you see even it's not beautiful. This is what we try to avoid, and you see many different facets on it.
What we are trying to show really is that it's very difficult to get the perfect angle since it's impossible to draw a straight line, and all knives looks different.
Because you have the roundness.
By clamping and how you clamp knife depending on the shape, and with your touch you can be as close as possible to having the same angle all along the bevel.
Exactly.
However, this might feel overwhelming for a beginner. It doesn't really matter if you would have half a degree more or less here at the... It doesn't matter, you will still have a perfectly cutting knife. This is more discussing the absolute theory, because we have a lot of people discussing
how it affects how to clamp.
Yeah,
to demonstrate it here.
Exactly.
And this is the same thing is here, like sometimes you don't need absolute in the middle.
No. You can move it out.
Forward, that's the...
But also they are not, and if we stay within angles, but there are other aspects that affect the angle as well. Some knives are not perfectly centered.
Yeah, because handmade.
Yes, some knives are, you can perhaps show a bit of different...
Also, just I want to show this here. You can really go into the radius and then choose for that knife, not the longest way. Choose like I have for the other knife. Go all the way in. The tighter or the stronger it's bent, curved, go in here. You gain 2 centimeters, 20 millimeters in radius, and that makes quite a big difference when you go all the way in and go really. And then you think from here, now I stress Victor a little bit, my camera for backwards, just to go in here. This is the trained eye, what you get with that. Okay, now we are far too high, but you see I have from here to here, that radius is easier to find here in the curve. Now, okay, it's a little bit difficult to see. We should go down. It makes that dimension. So we'll destroy a little bit. You go down, and then through. Now you see we come closer down, or because it's so round, then we have here really. This is like perfect in the radius here. You get a beautiful, nice shape here for the skinner. And here it doesn't matter because it's straight. And as long as you go straight, you get it. But as closer you get to the radius and the distance, otherwise you have to move upwards in the stone to compensate when it's too long. So these are things you have to play a little bit to understand. I think when you have the radius in mind, it gives you a clue, or just make something like that, a carton with your radius just to see it, to get it, and then you get the feeling how much you get the eye with time. This is training, this is not coming like that.
No, but this is also for the fine taster or the person that's interested in sharpening as a hobby. I would say for the chef that wants a sharp knife, you don't need to go into this detail. This is more for the... I said the shape of the knife, but also the thickness of the knife and the center can affect the angle.
The thicker the knife is, it can be vary a little bit, but even here with a A1 thick blade here, I think there are not many knives out there with 6 millimeters or more. It's a 0.3 to 0.4
but also that
degrees.
Yeah, that's nothing. But also the thickness here, and it becomes thinner here, will also affect the angle.
Exactly,
so
because then the same thing is here. Here's more material. It should be a wider bevel here than here, even if you have that bevel, and then it's thinned out here much more. Now it looks a little bit uneven, that it is a little bit smaller here than here, but here's the coating polished. So if you see, maybe the Victor, see the bevel is really, it's parallel. Maybe on the other side now, it's also worse. It's polished already in the coating. So these knives, this was hand polished. I recommend use for the hooning, also the jig, just to maintain really the nice bevel. Otherwise, in freehand, you end up a little bit too far in the coating.
that's just an aesthetical problem, I would say.
If you use the knife,
Yeah.
it's not a big issue. But if you have in your collection,
And you want to admire your knife, then it might bother.
Then
it might bother the sharpening doctor.
exactly, then you should use it. Then the other, what you said, affect the angle. When you clamp it here, you can clamp it beautifully because you have here surface, which is flat. So it's parallel, but then you have the hollow grind here, what we talked also first blade. But when you look, try to keep it very close, then you see these by the handmaids, they are beautiful done. But the edge here, it's not in the center of the blade. You see the edge is a little bit on the left side, or from you when you look on it on the right side, on this side. It's a little bit, maybe 0.5 millimeter, but it's very clear to see, hopefully you in the camera too. That means when you clamp it, the edge is a little bit like that. And this is the same effect you have with Swiss Army knives. When you have sometimes a half of workshop on tools in the blade, because even here the blade, you see, it's not in the middle of the handle, it's on the other side. That means if you would clamp the knife here because it's too small with a knife jig, so you need the SVM 0 or 00
Yes.
to clamp it. But then again, when you clamp it, it should be parallel to this. But in the handle, it presses to the side, so you are not. We can just clamp it. Maybe then you see it how. Victor is looking straight in the camera. You see it's to that side. You need to measure both angles separately for that knife to sharpen with a jig. But there's a small, even if it should go fast, these blades have the shape of a flat grind, very thin all the way through. And then if you look on sometimes you see universal support, and then even I sharpen it against the rotation freehand. So this is something you should not do when you're a beginner. We are in the advanced sharpening course. So therefore, as I said, don't try this at home.
Still, you have the solution with the short knife jig, the SVM 00, which works perfectly fine. The only thing you have to do is that you have to measure on both sides, since the knife is off-centered.
Yeah.
I would recommend to do that every time using the short knife jig, since it's very difficult to clamp it in the handle perfectly center. So I would recommend, even if it's not off-center, to always measure both angles.
This here with separate exclamation marks.
Yes.
Don't do it when you're a beginner.
You can admit you just want to show off. That's,
Yep. When we are in Switzerland, maybe you remember, you get a lot of these knives.
Yes.
Everyone has this in the pocket, and then it takes a long time to clamp it. So you learn it. What I do is, you see, I use my hand like the chick against it. It doesn't move back. And then just without pressure, flat on it. Because, again, the angle on that knife, it doesn't matter. Important is a tiny half a millimeter in the maximum, maybe just 0.2, 3 millimeters, a secondary bevel, because it's always thin. And then I go flat on it, and then just, you see a hold, and then just lift it like the normal life. And maybe you have seen also on Instagram, we've done it with a super small knife, which is a nice, beautiful. From on the other side, exact same thing. And after a while, you have your position and the distance, the feeling how much you should tilt it, and then you can do it also freehand. And the steel of these knives are not as hard. And then you get a nice, the bevel is here, and then just you have to hoon it. But you see a very tiny, tiny, because it's already thin. Normally you have maybe 2 more strokes, because I see here's a little bit damage in there. Then a little bit finer, of course. But it's also possible to do it freehand against. But
that
again,
needs a lot of training, and it's,
this is don't do it straight from the beginning.
No.
But it's also possible when you have to sharpen quite many of them.
We have a couple of questions I thought we could perhaps let our viewers in. Henrik Bo Carlsen is asking how to choose cook's knife's angle when you don't know the hardness, steel quality, please.
Also in general, you can say kitchen knives are between 56, 58, 59, Rockwell, 90%. Of course, there are few, like Japanese ones, they're harder because they're laminated, can be maybe even 61, I had one, or 62, but they're quite brittle, the steels, they're not very common. And then again, for which purpose? Even if you have a Japanese or normal kitchen knife, for what do you use it? You have even the size of the knife. This is more or less like for meat here, and then for vegetables also standard all round, it's more rounded, because typical different cutting techniques are in the shape of the blade. As I said, filleting knife, 20 degrees, all purpose, 25. If you have a lot of vegetables like hard vegetables like carrots or potatoes with dirt, roots, for example, which like the dirt or the sand, it's like sandpaper. So you would go maybe more to a 30 degrees, and then 30 over for the meat. If you don't know it, you can go on the manufacturer's pages. Then you get mostly the angle.
Now you're talking about whole angles. So when you say 20-25, you mean the complete angle, so 10 per side, or but
exactly minus.
But if you just have, I'm an average guy. I just have one cook's knife at home.
I would say take 25 or 30. Depends. If you feel that it gets too fast dull, it is cutting nicely and it goes quite fast dull, then I would go on a 30 degrees.
Yeah.
And again, if you use, for example, a cutting board from bamboo, bamboo is very hard and the fibers are horizontally. It's very hard to your knife. If you have like this cutting block where the fibers are upright, which is the preferred knife, it's much softer, destroy the edge not as fast. If you have frozen food, you should not use that on a knife. Some people do it, but then you need a cleaver. So again, the perfect angle for the purpose, the cutting board, There are so many factors, but in general you can say 20, 25, 30 for the filleting, as I said, and 30 plus.
I'm not a fine cook and not that refined as you, but at home my chef's knife, if I don't know the knife, I would put 15 degrees per side because it's
30.
Quite 30 degrees. It's quite all round. It lasts. You don't have to sharpen every week.
Exactly. And if you think it's too much force for cutting, you have small, with 30 degrees, you have very, very small bevels. Then you can say, okay, I take 25, then the bevels are getting, you see it, a little bit longer, and then cuts also a little bit nicer. And for myself, I use my kitchen knife like this, and with the own weight, it should go through the onion more or less. Then this is for me a knife.
Yes. We have a question here. How do you use the knife clamp to sharpen a short narrow blade? That's what we just showed with the SVM00. So
yep, very short, small
we
one.
already answered that one.
Or if it's like an office knife, also knives, straight ones like this, we come to that later also, when they are straight. Sometimes you can clamp it because you don't need to clamp more than 2 millimeters.
No, exactly. So
sometimes it's 2 millimeters absolutely enough
so
to
if possible, that's the...
Use that.
Yeah, it's very strong, the clamp.
Yep.
We have two questions here about knives. John is saying, I read a lot of discussions about toothy edge. Can you discuss, and propulsors, and can you explain sharpening knife with a serrated blade?
We'll take this with the special knives.
Yes.
Later on, we will take this answer too. Or we can go all directly to these special ones.
I think we time flies, you know. I think we should start getting into the special knives. Should we start with toothy knife right away, since we have it?
And then we go to the others. A serrated knife or tooth knife. This, for example, Victor shows it. They have already slightly a bevel on the backside, if you see, which is perfect because then we can exactly replicate that angle. We're marking it black and adjust it through the height of the universal support and get it. But through the stone, very, very fine, because to get a really nice finish, or even they're normally not extremely damaged as they are used, as they have to be. A spread knife on a wood board, all other boards will destroy anyway a knife. Then they are not so damaged. Then you can use really fine coarse, very fine grit and polish it. Then again, we turn around the machine, always honing away from you, from the backside on this bevel, and then the serrated, you can go really around the leather because the edge is getting soft with the time, and you can really go in there, and you can also apply quite good pressure and use nice honing paste. If the serration is really damaged, mostly it's compressed from that side, that's like mushrooms, you take on that bevel off. If you have no bevel on that side, you can use the outside of the stone. You can hold it, maybe you can go a little bit lower with the support, depends how you feel, and go not completely flat, but just a slightly angle here, just slightly. And then with low pressure, take a few strokes to get rid of these mushroomed tips. And then you go over exactly the same, polishing and go into it. And again, if it's very damaged inside, take some metal rod or wood stave, wet sandpaper around. It's the easiest, fastest way. And then just take these in the radius and sharpen them in that way, and then polishing again.
We sometimes see people on YouTube and so on sharpening on the side of the stone or on on the side of the stone. The problem with that is that the dents on all different serrated knives are different. So it's impossible to know. You will have to reshape the edge of the stone for every knife because they have different distances and so forth. And
it's quite aggressive because it's high speed. When you take a few strokes by hand, you have better control.
Exactly.
This is where you can do it, hold it, and very round with the support, of course, here. It's always good to have something to give you a little bit support. It keeps you much more.
What I want to say is that it is complicated since the distance is different, and also you need to be very fine tuned. Since you sharpen on a very small area, it's very aggressive.
Yeah. When you go not direct in this, because then you will maybe make a little bit bigger radius, and then go quite not in that direction. Go really in 90 degrees. Then you can put also the knife here on. It's also possible. It is very difficult that it looks really beautiful and nice. It's easier you have maybe a small rounded shape with the sandpaper, and it's very fast. Or you buy some abrasives, ceramic or in diamond coated. Yeah. They're quite cheap. You maybe around 13 euros, 15 euros. I've bought one.
We had a couple of questions of Hawk's bill, which is also common not only amongst our viewers but on forums and on.
It's the same like the belly opener, or if you have filleting knives or deboner, which are straight, but they have here to the handle the curve going around, and this is exactly the same. You use the radius of the stone. In that case, just clamp it in the middle, and then we use, you see you have a big bevel and then just a small bevel to the edge, and this is what you need to sharpen, only this part and this part in that knife. This is because quite on the edge aggressive. You can do it from that way, but I prefer it from that way, which is a little bit more better to control.
Here often we recommend to round off the edges as well.
Just looking a little bit longer out, and even here we're touching the cheek. You see, you can just really clamp very, very little, but still hold it very tight. So we don't like to touch it, and even here the radius is a little bit too. Just to find the right angle. Yes, now we are going over the edge, and this is, now we have the rough side. I want to, because then also the edge, of course, the rougher you are, the more it takes, it doesn't look nice, and you don't get the nice burr to hoon away.
And here also it takes a bit more practice than on a regular knife. On these types of Hawk's bill. There are also some users and some amongst our.
And you see, just for the first stroke again, we got here is just a little bit, tiny bit closer to the stone, but it's just maybe 0.5 millimeter. So it is really. and again, and then you just follow it, and lifting up here is getting a little bit straight. And you feel already the burr on the other side.
Some of
The other side is exactly the same.
some people also like to do it freehand. We even have Tormek staff, but I, as you, prefer with the jig.
You can do it when freehand, again holding and try, and then just maybe hold the hand and then just try draw the knife.
It requires a bit of training, rounding off the edge, and we go edge trailing this time.
Yeah, exactly. Just
great.
it's also possible.
Also, we have a bit more about it in our hunting episode, where we sharpen a belly opener, which is actually the exact same.
Exactly
technique.
the same, yeah.
So go to our bushcraft episode and you will find it.
No, these type of knives.
Yeah,
It's a few things to say also.
it's a tanto knife.
Tando knife. So the same thing is like the serrated knives. They're straight on the back side. In that case, I would go with a little bit like sandpaper on a rounded safe. Even like on the meat when you barbecue the pins, because they're slightly small diameter, you can use
They have different diameters.
Yeah,
also, the
exactly.
different depths, so.
And they're coated, so it should be nice. You see, nice shape. So to protect these blades, use like a cloth tape to protect before you clamp, otherwise you get scratch marks in there. Then sometimes these openers are in the way for the one hand opening here. They are in the way. Most you can demount it. This one is, I think it's glued or Loctite in there, you don't get it off. So even put a little bit cloth over it to protect it. Otherwise, when you come on the stone, you will scrape up, and it looks not nice. So I will be just carefully. The straight one, it's easy to clamp that way. The tando knife, it is just clamp it from the side, parallel to the beginning, and then oops. Then just go, of course, then from the traditional position here, that way. So this is also ready used, so therefore it doesn't matter. But when you have your knife for your collection, take cloth, then you, of course, quite a bit higher. Then you use the marker method, blacken it, and then you can sharpen that way and the other that way. So very easy to get these also sharpened.
I don't know, is there any other knives you feel in particular you would like to?
Question is also ceramic knives.
Yes.
The ceramic knives, you can sharpen them, but on that stone nothing happens, because these mostly of zirconia oxide, it's hard.
Yeah.
Diamond
So
wheels.
we
These
would
use
say
the super abrasives.
Yeah, exactly. I would just, so before we, all steel knives, I would say, no matter how many rock wells they have, works on the stone.
Yeah, the harder maybe takes a little bit
Longer, but still works.
It
But
works.
for ceramic knives, then it's
Yeah.
the diamond wheels that are
Exactly.
the key to success.
If you have really damaged knives, for example, then you can use the diamond wheel, the coarse DC 250 with 360 grit. But for the normal purpose, the fine DF, diamond wheel fine 250 with 600 grit is absolutely sufficient, or for a little bit finer, gives you more or less this silky finish, the extra fine with 1200 grit. And then of course you can choose the Japanese stone on the other side with 4000 grit, the Japanese water stone.
But not for the ceramic knife.
Not for the ceramic knife, you will for ages.
Yeah.
But for ceramic knives, go as fine as possible, because diamond is hard, it's no problem. Go for the 1200. and will take. It's really like it melts like butter,
Yeah.
and very very little pressure, because the steel is, I would say, compare steel to the ceramic. This is chewing gum, and this is like crystalline, like sugar cubes. When you sharpen it, you don't remove the material, it will break off in the tip. So therefore,
you
the
can't-
finer the better.
You can't hone a ceramic knife either.
You can't hone it. You can a little bit get a little bit finer, but you really
there is no burr. In
it's
the
no
same way
burr.
as
It
a
will
knife.
break off
Steel knife. Yeah.
in the crystalline structure. But you get quite nice. But there sometimes you will find them a little bit here and there, but depends on which market. What I discover in the South European, or Italy, France, you will see them more often. But
and also it
is going up because they are too complicated to sharpen. They break off the tips.
Yeah.
You can repair it, of course, and with diamond it's absolutely no problem. It's easy to do.
When they came out on the market, they were quite the hit.
Problem,
and still we see quite a lot of people have them at home.
At home, yeah. But it's not longer. They have still the knives, but it's not longer a big market, because you can get them quite cheap, but then throw away, buy a new one. It is not worth to getting to a sharpening service if they can sharpen them. So,
great.
If you have it, diamond, fine.
I think we should move on to honing, because we haven't spoken about honing.
Exactly.
Freehand honing with a jig. However, honing is very important and key to get a good result. Could you tell us more about that?
Complete, if you say sharpening, first we say grinding, get the bevel, get it finer, and then the sharpening, it is really the fine. With the Japanese waterstone, for example, you get it really perfect. And then normally you don't need to hone, because 4000 the burr is very, very little. But we discover on mostly steel varieties, you get a slightly burr. So you just slightly go with a ladder, you will get rid of them.
This is if you use the Japanese waterstone, but if you go directly from the stone, you need to deburr. Because you will have a burr and you will have...
Just maybe to explain the burr, this is the edge, when you sharpen on that side, you take the material up, then you turn around your knife, you take the other side. So what happens, you take the material up, it builds up layers of layers, very thin, and this is what you feel on the other side. And this is what we have to hone away. And then our recommendation is, we take whatever knife we have here, take with that. If you sharpen that way and you have the burr on that side, we start always to deburring on the same side where you have sharpened, because the burr, you polish it, or it's like fine sharpening with very fine abrasives, make it thinner, and then it more or less falls off, and then also the other side to get really the nice perfect apex.
You want to remove it as gentle as possible.
Exactly.
To get the smoothest bevel possible.
Exactly. If you would go directly on the other side, so when you have the burr on that, and you would polish it on that side, it will break off. And then you will destroy again the nice perfect edge. So therefore always first from the other side.
Still, this is a detail that will give you an even sharper result. Even if you would go against, you will still have a knife that cuts through tomatoes without...
Absolutely. Then we go to the next step again. If you use the stone. The stone, the particles and the slurry scrapes forward the material. And this is quite a fine and longer burr. If you use the super abrasives like diamond, they really cut. So the burr is mostly shorter, but they are thicker in the bottom, in the root. So there's mostly the leather a little bit too soft, and you feel maybe you have to hone longer than compared to a stone. Then you should go to our, because it is harder, it's also a little bit more abrasive, our composite wheel to deburring. Works the same like the leather, but you don't need a paste. And take off the burr there, and then you can go for the last finish back on the leather. So
when you sharpen on the diamond, you would recommend the composite
go
honing
first,
wheel.
and then if you want again the next little, then go absolute finish on the leather. But this it would take too much time. It's too soft. The risk is to round it off the edge again, because it is harder, the material, it's more abrasive.
But for knife sharpening on stones, or for sharpening on stones, you would recommend the leather?
The leather is absolutely okay. So because with the diamond you get a little bit thicker and a harder burr, so this is the better choice. And then for the last finish you can just polish it a little finer, because it does not give really the shiny effect like the paste and the leather. So this is maybe to take in consideration. Even when we talk about sharpening, sharpening is only you shape, give them the bevel. You will get anyway a burr, but you want to minimize the building of the burr, because the burr is that when you feel it doesn't cut. And then you have to hoon, and hooning takes in the time maybe completely the finishing of the edge, maybe 50-50 in time. But in the performance, it's the most important happens here on that side of the machine, not here. Just get a little bit, this is just shaping.
Yeah.
But here you get that side, except the Japanese stone, of course. This I will see this more or less as hooning also, because it's so minimal.
But to get a good result, you're depending on both, because you need to shape the bevel, you need to take away the scratches on the knife, so you need to shape the stone. But if you forget the honing or don't do it properly, you won't get a good result either.
Exactly, this is most important. And then there are two ways, freehand or with the jig. Freehand, what do I do mostly on a normal standard knife? And you get the sharpness, you can split paper, you can cut hair. But if you want exactly for these coated knives, like this here, or what we talked about, these blackened ones, or if you have like a beautiful damask knife, for those, you don't like to polish off the oxidation here. You want just slightly only where the edge is. Then it's very, very difficult. Then I would say, then I go with the jig in the horizontal position and polish from that side. Again, adjusting the angle that I really nicely lie on the same angle to polish with that, or even on that wheel.
Even if it's an advanced knife sharpening class, we should say that when you hone, never go towards it. You always go trailing when you
always trailing, otherwise
no matter
this
how
lasts for your life, but if you go only in one direction wrong, you will cut immediately in the leather, even in the composite wheel. Then honing always, and then you have also the arrow here. It's very this rotation.
We have a question from our good friend Ken Schröder. What is the effect
Hello, Ken.
of water on the composite wheel?
Yeah, also personally I don't use it, but if you want to get a little bit less friction, you can just a little bit of water, a little bit of sponge, and from time to time, because it will evaporate and will dry, just put a little bit water. It has no effect. It is just getting a little bit less friction. Maybe you get a better control feeling. Personally, I don't use it.
And I often use it. I think
it's
a question
there's no right, there's no
preferences.
wrong. It depends on how you want it. It's the same on the leather. With the honing paste, this is maybe also something to highlight again. The honing paste, there's oil in there, keeps the leather moist, and is exactly the best polishing effect when it gets from the paste status to the dry status. Get the best polishing effect, but then you have more friction. Most people like a little bit more oil because it's less friction, but you have also less polishing effect, because the particles slip through. So this is again, it's a little bit preference.
You need
takes
friction
longer
to take away the burr. So.
And this is also, again, back to the burr, the bigger burr. takes a little bit longer. This is more abrasive, takes a little bit faster, a little bit stronger. And again, if you have a knife with a, say, filleting knife, 20 degrees, what we talked always, the burr is bigger, it takes longer to polish. Then you have maybe an outdoor knife, which is maybe with a 35-degree angle. The burr is much smaller. It goes faster to polish. There's also a difference. And not just a few times and it's okay. Test on your finger, take in paper, very flat, look on the fibers. You will see directly if you need a few strokes more or not.
Perfect. Time flies when you have a good time. I'm sure we
There's
could be
another
standing
one.
here for the whole night if I would just let you go. We will be back, I'm sure, in the future with new questions and new discussions. I love to hear you talk about it. I think your passion runs through the camera. I hope the viewers feel it as well.
Of course.
But for today,
We have to round off.
Yes, we're already past the hour. Thank you all the viewers for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. If you see it afterwards and have questions, please ask your questions in the commentary below and we'll answer them afterwards. You can also send emails to support@tormek.se if you have questions. Thank you, Wolfgang.
Thank you, Sebastian.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Victor, for holding the camera. Sorry for passing your hour. I think you're tied in the arm by now. Especially a big thank you to all you viewers. Stay safe, stay sharp, and have a nice summer. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.